Hello and welcome. My name is Brianna, or Bree Schiavone. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, mental health counselor, coach. I am passionate about changing the way in which we talk about and work with mental health constructs, which is perhaps how I came to know so intimately what Dr. Marshall Rosenberg once taught as nonviolent communication, or NVC. While these empathic exchanges are very much rooted in practices and principles as taught by Dr. Rosenberg, I certainly enjoy bringing in the work, ideas of several other persons in the field, both formally trained as NVC facilitators and not, like myself. I do work closely with the Compassionate Communication Center of Ohio here in Columbus, who is offering grant funding for this monthly meetup series. Today, I'm going to give you an idea of how we continue to meet and work with the material at hand, while really spending the majority of time speaking about the construct of emotions. Emotions as energy, emotions as felt experience, and also the idea of false emotions. The idea that we have created language traps that prevent us from really talking about being in connection with what is at the heart so often of our felt experiences, feelings themselves. Please see the show notes for a link to a handout that I will certainly reference today. And mark your calendars moving forward the third Wednesday of every month through June of 2023 at 8:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be facilitating a conversation and ultimately guided practice using the principles of compassionate communication and the intuition of those of us impacted by life with a chronic illness. The Zoom room made available to us through Diabetes Sangha is the venue for these monthly meetups, but participants from the Sangha and patrons of my passion project, Dear Diagnosis, are all welcome to attend at no charge. So let's get started. In real time, when we met, I asked that those members in attendance take themselves momentarily off of mute to introduce by way of sharing their name, their physical location, if comfortable, and 1 to 3 words to describe how each person was feeling at that moment in time. Afterwards, I sought to engage the larger group in a reflection, asking folks to talk openly about how they know what they're feeling at any given moment and where specifically each person goes to look for that information. I asked participants too to reflect on the idea that if we were given a choice, if each of us had a choice to be born with or without feelings, which would be chosen and why? And this beautifully lent itself to a conversation whereby we sought to look at what messages we received from our family, our culture, our religion, society at large, what messages we might be receiving today still through the media, our work environment, specific to emotions, specific to whether or not it's okay to share emotions, speak openly about emotions, display emotions. Perhaps there being certain emotions that are more acceptable, permissible, maybe even sought after in a cultural context than others. And as we worked in a larger group to answer these questions, I reminded folks about the job of the mind, the job of our autonomic nervous systems, the purpose of these things we're calling emotions. And I'll remind you now that there really is only one reason for why we think what we think, why we feel what we feel, and ultimately why we do what we do. And that has to do with some very primitive, simplistic wiring. We, like every other member of the animal kingdom, have needs, universal human needs. And at any given moment, the brain and the body are working to try to ensure that we don't just survive, but that we thrive by way of getting this hierarchy, this ever evolving complexity of needs met. There are some Latin roots of intrigue, to me at least, when it comes to the word emotion. Generally speaking, you can write that word as E-motion, which has to do with the idea that all emotions is energy in motion. There's a literal translation in Latin that suggests that the word itself means to move out, as in when we allow ourselves to truly feel what we're feeling, which generally involves acknowledging what we feel. This thing, this emotion, this energy will move out of the way, because it is truly here to alert us to our needs, to inform us to our choices about how to respond to things. So almost like taking that vehicle in because there is a check engine light on. We don't know what to do with that check engine light until we read the code, deconstruct the message. This process of linking needs to feelings starts with feeling our feelings. In fact, that word feelings, right? It's synonymous for emotions. Because really all we're talking about right now is a felt somatic experience. Even if most of us feel averse to feeling our feelings, certainly most of us shirk away oftentimes from anything that we suspect will be unpleasant emotional feedback. But while attending to this can be jarring, if not uncomfortable, emotions are no more a problem than the smoke detector in your home. What's problematic is the way in which we reactively express a feeling, like I do. So oftentimes when I hear my T-Slim alarm going off, 5 to 10 minutes after it already alerted me to the problem at hand, or my iPhone duplicating that T-Slim alarm, and I scream, I release an expletive. It's my reactive expression towards this alarm that is more the problem than the alarm itself, meant to alert me to what is happening and what is needed. So too can be problematic that habitual suppressing of feelings. So guilty also of taking the batteries out of my smoke detector so that I can have a moment of ease in the kitchen when I'm cooking something smoky. Not a horrible thing in a moment's time, but problematic if I fail to put the batteries back in when the cooking is done. So much of what influences me in conversation with you today comes from the work of Oren J. Sofer, who is also a trained CNBC facilitator, a somatics instructor, and a mindfulness instructor. In his beautiful book, Say What You Mean, he talks openly about the idea of there existing a mythology of emotion. And he writes, we each receive a kind of emotional inheritance. Wherever we're born and whatever we're born into, we inherit generations of ideas, beliefs, and behaviors from our family, culture, religion, and society. Through the socialization process, we're given certain messages over and over again about what emotions we're allowed to feel and express based on aspects of our quote unquote social location, our gender, our age, our class, our race. So, for example, for centuries, aspects of Western philosophy and religion have posited a split between reason and emotion, the passions of the heart seen as irrational, driving us to do harmful things. Today, and generally speaking, we continue to associate emotionality with vulnerability, the feminine, weakness, and danger, if not manipulation, subtle coercion. So a part of developing a wise relationship with our emotions involves becoming aware of what we think, believe, and consequently feel about them. Learning to quiet the mind and open awareness to this moment-to-moment energy flow can be challenging for most of us, because many of us learned to believe in childhood that experiencing or expressing feelings could be dangerous. It certainly involved vulnerability. So pause now and reflect for yourselves. Just as we talked about in a larger group construct, what messages did you receive from your family, your culture, religion, society? What messages are you receiving still because of the media or the work culture that you're embedded in day to day? These messages could be explicit, like, big girls don't cry, suck it up, be a man. Or they could be implicit. Think about what was modeled for you, what is modeled still. And the judgments, good, bad, appropriate, inappropriate, too much, too little, just enough. Consider, are there certain emotions that feel more acceptable to you than others? A moment of reflection. Moments to recognize what may get in the way of your feeling into any moment in time. A singing bowl sounds to bring you back. And before continuing, just an invitation that I offered to those in attendance and would like to offer to you in turn. As you move through the weeks to come, can you notice any fear of feeling your emotions or of others expressing emotion? Can you bring some curiosity, awareness to where, when, and how emotional expression becomes thwarted? There's another CNBC trained facilitator, Peggy Smith, who wrote a lovely article entitled Feelings, the Golden Road. And she talks about this road to radical responsibility when it comes to our feelings, acknowledging them, working with them, giving voice to them. Through NVC, we're encouraged to embrace our feelings as valuable information. It's what helps us get to the needs. She writes, whether the feelings I am experiencing are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, they're a road pointing me to the universal needs that are alive within me. What others say and do may be the stimulus to what I feel, but it is a thinking trap to assume that anything external causes or makes me feel any particular sort of way. As Dr. Marshall Rosenberg once wrote, we can learn to see that our feelings result from how we choose to receive what others say and do, as well as from our particular needs and expectations in that moment. I'll pause here and just reiterate something that is admittedly hard for me to stomach in moments, but is so imperative to return to over and over again. We are responsible for our feelings. What others say and do can be a stimulus to our needs being in threat, to a critical, judgmental jackal voice coming into play. But it is never the cause. And within that space exists the opportunity to illuminate the construct, to become aware of the choices. So Peggy Smith continues. She writes, in using my feelings as the roadway to my precious needs, I've got to be careful of two detours that take me down the blame and judgment journey instead of the self-connecting journey of needs-based consciousness. She continues, by way of talking about this thing in language that exists so frequently and yet is so problematic, whereby we confuse our thoughts with feelings. She writes, feelings are an energy that exists in my body. Sometimes I have names for my feelings: anger, fatigue, hopelessness, happiness. Other times I experience the energy that is present as a sensation. I might feel the energy of constriction somewhere, a tightening of muscles, a sensation of bubbles in my chest, or a vague sensation in my leg reminiscent of smoke. Learning to quiet the mind and open awareness to moment energy can be challenging. We don't want to be judged as right, wrong, good, bad, so we try to protect ourselves from judgment by labeling our thoughts as feelings. Here's where that linked handout in the show notes will come in useful. Because to start, you will find what we might call setup statements with grammatical errors. Ways in which we oftentimes use the word feel, but then distort the message by inserting a thought. So here are your grammatical red flags. If you're going to say, I feel, the next word ought not be that, like, or as if. I feel that you should know better. I feel like a failure. I feel as if I'm talking to a wall. So too should you be aware that putting the words I, you, he, she, they, it, that these pronouns after the word feel will also create a conflicting message. I feel I am constantly on call. I feel they weren't listening to me. I feel it is useful or useless. Names and nouns referring to people, just as problematic. I feel Amy has been pretty responsible. I feel my boss is being manipulative. Peggy Smith gives us this nice way of testing whether or not we're truly expressing a feeling or a thought by simply swapping the word feel to think before examining whether or not the sentence still makes sense. So I could just as easily say, I think that you should know better. I think I am constantly on call. I think Amy has been pretty responsible. Which helps to illuminate that these are not true feelings. These are thoughts. And they're likely to result in a sense of judgment, shame, blame, whether that comes from within or without. It's problematic. Peggy points out a second quote unquote detour, explained in the article as something that will prevent you from being able to authentically experience and express feelings. Because of the use of select words that assign or infer judgments, again, are used in place of feelings. Before I began to study these constructs, before I read Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication book, I may have picked any number of these words listed there as faux feelings, evaluative words on your handout. I may have used them interchangeably with feelings that now I've begun to separate out, pose as alternative or suspect feelings that lie beneath the use of these evaluative words. So these words include things like abused, manipulated, taken advantage of, bullied, cheated, provoked, treated unfairly, unheard, unseen, unwanted, used. Now, let me be clear, these words in some ways are helpful because when a word like that shows up in my head or comes out of my mouth, it's alerting me to some strong, unpleasant reaction. It can signal the need for me to connect further to the story I'm telling myself, to the interpretation of events at hand, to the way in which judgment is present. Remember, the job of my brain and of my nervous system is to judge, is to keep me alive, to help me thrive. But if I want to do that in a way that brings flow and fluidity to my life, that brings connection to self, to others, I need to catch these faux feeling words. And I need to consider, when I tell myself that I am, place the word there. And then reflect, how do I feel? So for example, I might recognize that I am about to use the word cheated. I feel cheated. But when I tell myself that I am cheated, the true question is, how does that make me feel? Angry? Vulnerable? Scared? Shocked? Surprised? Confused? We can learn to hear the wisdom beneath our judgments, just as we can learn to connect our emotions to universal human needs. An invitation here to continue to work with the handout, to begin to monitor for your own use of these grammatical obstacles, putting pronouns after the word feel, for example, to beginning to monitor for these evaluative words, these faux feeling words that show up in your vocabulary. And to begin to play with that reflection. When I tell myself that I am, how do I really feel? The handout is not conclusive. It is meant to be a working document, an invitation to help you recognize that behind each of these problematic words likely exists some much more powerful, sensorially based words, experiences, and that as we get closer to those components, we can begin to play with the idea of what needs are in threat, what needs are in play. At this point in the program, I led a mindfulness practice. I'm not going to lead that again here today. I'll tell you instead that you can find it as a single recording from the last Wednesday in September, which I believe has been updated to both our resource tab at the Diabetes Sangha and here on our YouTube channel. The name of that recording is Sensory Science, the Art of Feeling What You Feel. And in it, a mindfulness practice to simply scan the body and begin to play with words that are much more rooted in sensation than in this realm of emotional literacy or vocabulary. Throughout the month coming, October, I'll be continuing on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Standard Time, same Zoom room, to provide ways in which we can develop emotional agility, something that Oren J. Sofer talks much about, and that is intimately related to the ability to identify, feel into, with equanimity and give voice to our felt experience. Join us in October for another meetup to the tune of Empathic-Exchange. We will continue working with emotions, moving further into the realm of identifying, giving voice to, guessing. I look forward to seeing you then. Until next, be well.